The hottest stock on the beat is position review previews. Why? Because we're halfway done and we're inside 3 weeks to the start of spring practice. Welcome to the beat. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. This is presented by the Waterworks. We have completed the position review previews on the offensive side of the football. It is time to move over to the silver bullets and more specifically, the tip of the spear with the rushman at defensive end. Welcome to a Wednesday. Birm, how's it going?
It's going great. It's a really fascinating position. I'm excited to get to dive into it because I think, ironically, after 2 years of really good play from Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Kinyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, specifically in 2025, there's a ton of unknowns, but I think there's actually a chance that the ceiling of this group at defensive end is as high as it was with Jack and JT, which is kind of crazy to say.
Interesting, because Caden Curry was pretty darn good last year, Birm.
He was better than darn good. He was what everyone thought he couldn't be, except for some people.
Oh, come on.
But the reality...
Already?
Well, yeah, I don't want to waste too much time. I want people to know I'm patting myself on the back early. The facts are, like, Caden Curry was sensational. He had, 11 sacks for Ohio State in 2025. He was also...
To go with 16 and a half tackles for loss.
16 and a half tackles for loss, but it like game-changing plays. Think about the Illinois game, the fumble recovery he made and the strip sack that he had down from Jermaine Matthews down towards the goal line. Should have been a touchdown, by the way. It's just one of those things where the depth of this year's group, if guys make the leap that they are expected to, combined with their high-end potential, I think gives you a top-to-bottom better group than Ohio State maybe had in 2024, even with Kinyatta and Caden backing up Jack and JT, which, again, like, Larry Johnson has taken a lot of heat on the recruiting trail in the last few years for failing to close on some big-name defensive ends. But when you take a moment now to take stock of where the room is, it's certainly uncertain, but there is a lot of potential and some guys that I think people are going to be excited to watch develop heading into 2026.
Well, we might be accused of burying the lead right here, which the guy who is leading that room and is coming off of what I think might be his best season of a legendary career leading the defensive line. We expect Larry Johnson to be back as well. Still, I don't know if retirement plans are ever going to be in the cards for him or what the plan is going to be moving forward. I know that we both fully expect that the ink will be drying on a contract soon to make sure that Larry Johnson isn't going where for at least the 2026 season. Anything beyond that, I'm not going to speculate. I've learned my lesson multiple times that just when you count out Larry Johnson, or if you think that he himself might be trending towards retirement, he finds that fountain of youth once again. And you look at this group, I can see why he would be excited to stick with it for one more year with Kinyatta Jackson, Birm. And then, as we'll get into a lot more, even when you are approaching this, where not just a year ago you're losing Caden Curry, but to the transition away from Jack and JT and their longevity. You've got Epi Satanale and Zion Grady both champing at the bit to get in there for the Buckeyes. There's a lot of potential in those two guys to pair with Kinyatta Jackson. I'm pretty curious about what another year for Bo Atkinson looks like, whether he can make a physical jump forward with a full off season working in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and working with Larry Johnson, whether he's be better suited at 3-tech. Maybe that's another conversation for another day. I don't know, but this is a position group that we haven't even talked about the new additions and hybrid pass rushers, which I'm sure we will. But there are a lot of different permutations and a lot of talent that's on the way and on the rise for Ohio State. It's an exciting group.
What's fascinating to me is how different Larry Johnson has built his defensive lines over the last few years. If you remember 5-6 years ago, back in 2019, 2020, there seemed to be a goal to get pretty much everybody to be 6'5", 275 pounds and just play 4 guys across the front that are all the same size. But then you realize those guys are hard to find. And now they're super expensive to find. So you also have to try to find ways to mold the defense into different, structures. And Matt Patricia is excellent at that. So I think that's why you see the change at defensive end, where you have Ohio State moving on from guys that we thought would have an opportunity to come back this year, like CJ Hicks, for example, and Joshua Mickens and Dominic Kirks, who had a good spring a year ago. Those guys are all gone. Obviously, you add Quaver Saw, who is a player that you really like, but he's more of the Jonathan Cooper type of defensive end, 6'2.5", 235 pounds. Like, how does Matt Patricia's defense utilize a guy like that compared to what Larry Johnson did with Coop and the 2016 through 2019 seasons?
And Baron Browning.
What role does a guy like Christian Allegro play in this conversation? Because I think that there is a real world where he gets used almost exclusively in an edge rusher type of role, like what Arvell was doing a little bit. Obviously, probably not the high end ceiling of Arvell, but if that allows TJ Alford and Riley Pettijohn and Peyton Pierce to stay on the field more at linebacker, I can see that happens. And then there's the two incoming freshmen that we're not going to talk a lot about on this show because we've learned our lesson in the past. Like there's very few freshmen that are going to come in and make an impact early, but Ohio State signed Kari Wilder, the 5-star defensive end from California, in the 2026 class with the goal of him playing often and regularly for this defense. And so I want to make sure that before we start diving into the individual players and the positions, that guys like Kari Wilder and even Dre Quinn get a mention here, because that is what the position is going to need. And I want to go back to last year if we can, Austin, because I know there's so much discussion. We talked about it with players in the Woody about, are you being allowed to pass rush? Are you being allowed to be that guy that you feel like you need to be for the NFL? Caden Curry had 11 sacks. Was he being allowed to pass rush more than Kinyatta Jackson in a 6.5 sacks? Because I don't buy that necessarily. So
I agree with you. I don't mean to interrupt. I don't think that they were just tapping the helmet and saying, this is the play, Caden Curry is going to go get it. I think he won more individual matchups personally. And I think I'd love to continue to have that conversation. I think we probably will once we get into spring ball with Matt Patricia and Larry Johnson both about some of that, because it will also tie into some things that, because Kinyatta Jackson, to be more blunt about it, was the one who was outspoken about it, like publicly into microphones in the middle of the season. Like, I want more opportunities to rush the passer. And we didn't dive into what exactly that meant. We knew that they were caging the quarterback a lot, and we also knew that Ohio State's defense was highly effective with that approach. It was hard to really want to disrupt that. But I don't think that they were telling Kinyatta Jackson late in the year, like, just cage the quarterback. You're allowed to go win it. It's the same thing with the running back conversation we had a few weeks ago, right? You're allowed to break a tackle and go score. Every play is designed to go score a touchdown. And maybe not every play is designed to get a sack, but if you just beat a tackle one-on-one, you can go get one. That's fine.
Yeah, there was no better example of that than the Washington game in September. Like, Ohio State was not entering that game with the game plan of blitz the heck out of DeMond Williams. It was contain him, but as long as the back end is doing their job and as long as you can win your one-on-one rep against the offensive tackle, then Kinyatta Jackson and Caden Curry both had monster games in that day against Washington. And Kinyatta had a couple games where we talked throughout the season, like, that might have been his best game ever. Well, that might have been his best game ever. No, that might have been his best game ever. And so now that you've seen that, you saw what maybe happens if they cut him loose a little bit, because that almost the majority of his productivity came at the back half of the year when after that conversation had been had publicly. Yeah. So I think there's very little opportunity for excuses at this point if you're Kinyatta Jackson, and I'm not saying he's trying to create one or asking for one, but I do think that this is a season where a week ago we were asked on the mailbag about defensive MVPs, and I said, for the defense to be what I think it needs to be for them to make the playoff, it has to be someone like Peyton Pierce, because somebody has to emerge from a spot that is completely a question mark right now. Like, to me, that's what that means. It's not that I'm saying Kinyatta Jackson shouldn't be the MVP, because if he has the year that he should have, even without somebody else emerging, there's no reason he shouldn't be a double-digit sack guy for Ohio State in 2026. But is that in him? And I think that it has to be for this version of Ohio State to be its best.
it needs to be, because the math is not going to be perfect, and this is also not a math show. But he, at 6.5 sacks a year ago, he's basically going to have to double his output there to get to what Caden Curry provided. Someone is going to have to do that. The number of games that Ohio State plays, that's still less than 1 sack per game that came from Caden Curry. We know how productive he was. We know how effective he was. Tackles for loss all over the place. We already talked about that. But someone has to take up that mantle. And Kinyatta Jackson had multiple paths in front of him this offseason, whether that was the NFL draft. Everyone is a free agent. He would have commanded a premium elsewhere. He also was getting a premium to come back to Ohio State, because Ohio State knows how difficult he would have been to replace. And they did not want to be in a situation where they had to follow up losing Jack and JT by having to replace Caden Curry and Kinyatta Jackson at the same time. So, he had he earned the leverage. He also had the leverage. He used it to come back. I think that was the right decision for him. I think it's the best scenario for Ohio State. But the NFL draft component of that for Kinyatta Jackson specifically, his numbers are dwarfed by Caden Curry's looking at a year ago. He is going to have to take a step forward and be more productive. And whether that's scheme, whether that's on him, whether that's aggression or whatever, I don't know the definitive answer to that. All I know is that Ohio State has a lot to replace, and Kinyatta Jackson doesn't have to do it alone, because we named 4 or 5 other options already. But someone will have to be the leader for this team. And we know that he's become more vocal. We know that he's a candidate to wear the Block O, but he's also someone who needs to wear the responsibility of getting to the quarterback and finishing the plays more consistently than he did a year ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, bottom line is, if a guy wants to wear the Block O, he has to be a consistent driving force on the team, and not just when things are going well. And I think that's going to be something that, people will ask about KJ, which may be unfair. I don't know. I mean, it's there because of the way social media has exploited his family's discussion in the previous years about potential opportunities elsewhere or whatever. But he's been at Ohio State heading into year 5 now for him. And he's a guy that has done everything that they've asked. And so now the question is, can he do what they're asking now, which is be more productive, be a more vocal, more vociferous leader, be a guy that brings up Epi Satanale and Zion Grady and Bo Atkinson and Christian Allegro and Quaver Saw and Dre Quinn and Kari Wilder. Like, that's your job now. So it's a lot of pressure on Kinyatta. And I think that it makes sense to start the conversation and have a bulk of the conversation focused on him. But without someone else emerging and Kinyatta's role in that emergence, then there's more pressure put on him than ever to be, a Chase Young-esque. And I'm not sure he's that type of player, but he certainly, there's no reason a guy at 6'5", 275 pounds who bends the way he does and moves the way he does it should be off the field for Ohio State this season very much. And so he's going to have all the opportunity and reps to do it. The question is he ready for that? I think he is, based on what we heard about him last year and what Sonny Styles would say about him at Big Ten Media Days, et cetera. And then who's the other guy? Who steps up? Yep. Because it might be committee work, but someone will eventually emerge from that committee. And who's it going to be?
Yeah, that's going to have to happen in spring football, which spring is just around the corner, and you can keep your home ready for any weather with the Waterworks and Hetter Energy Savings Plan. Get priority heating service, members-only savings, and continuous comfort all year long. Calling today to schedule at the Waterworks and Hetter, 614-232-2222. Do you have any, are you leaning one way or another about who you think might be the first to emerge or the leader of that pack?
Yeah, I mean, I think the natural assumption, the natural choice would be Zion Grady based on the way Ohio State used him towards the end of the 2025 season. But I think that the conversation around Epi Satanale is muted because he didn't play very often last year. But I think that the expectations for him at the Woody are just as high as they are for Zion Grady. And I don't think that the conversation will be as prevalent about Epi because he is not playing as much as Zion did a year ago. But I bet it will be after the first couple open practices. I agree. I think it's coming, but I don't know that heading into spring people should have that expectation. But I would not be surprised if walking out of spring they had that expectation. but that's where it has to begin. And then what you can get out of Quay Rasaw, because again, this is a guy who played at Alabama as a freshman, started games for Alabama as a freshman. I think it was a former high 4-star, low 5-star type of recruit. Everything you want. And if Matt Patricia's defense is built on versatility, built on exploiting advantages, is the opportunity for Rasaw to get in there and be something different than Ohio State's had in the last few years. I mean, to me, he's not fundamentally different than Caden Curry, but I don't know about the motor. And if like, he's probably a higher upside athletic version of Caden Curry, but what made Caden special was the fact that he just was relentless. So from what we've heard from people around the building in the time that Quay and James Smith and those guys have been there, they seem to be encouraged by what they hear out of those guys. And obviously James Smith is a defensive tackle, so he's not involved in this conversation directly. But I think the path for Quay Rasaw and James Smith is going to be walked fairly together. So we'll see how that goes. But it starts there. And something about Kari Wilder. I go back to last May, again, incoming freshman from California. I remember talking with an Ohio State coach who had been out to see Kari Wilder in practice, went out there to find out, like, is this someone who we're going to really go all in on? And within like 5 minutes of practice, he was playing tight end and was running vertical routes and like mossing people 40 yards down the field at tight end. And they're like, okay, we're all in. And then you fast forward that 8 months and he's 6'4.5". He's 265 pounds. He is going to play this year. And I'm not expecting that he's going to emerge as the starter or anything opposite Kinyatta Jackson, but it's the recurring conversation we keep having. When you are putting resources into freshmen, especially freshmen from the other side of the country, all the way from California, knowing what UCLA is going to offer him this offseason or what USC is because they let him get out of their backyard, or Oregon or anybody else, you're going to find out early. And Ohio State is going to give Kari Wilder a chance to be that guy. So how do Epi and Zion and Quay hold off a guy like that? And, that again, we're beating a dead horse, but this is why it'd be really nice to have some conversations or with people at the Woody on the record so we can get some real tactile feedback for people as opposed to just our sources and what people are saying behind the scenes.
Yeah. And some of it even now is still speculation, because I think from the coaches, from the people that we talk to, because you still have to get out there on the field and see what this looks like. And we know who the candidates are to play, but that buzzword that we've talked about all January in the transfer portal, previous to that, with the caliber of recruits and the versatility that Ohio State was looking for in them, as Matt Patricia has an opportunity to get together with Larry Johnson and say, this is what the future looks like for pass rushing, playing on the edge, multiple fronts. Yeah, I feel like, I guess my curiosity for this spring is more not necessarily about who it's going to be, but how it's going to look. And I know that we won't get definitive answers, or we won't see many of them once it becomes time for scrimmage settings outside of Student Appreciation Day. But, if what you're talking about with Rasaw or Christian Allegro is true, which I certainly think that it is, like, it makes it more difficult to have these conversations about this is the defensive end review preview, because it's going to start looking like, well, this guy could play linebacker and he can play edge and he can play defensive end. And you start moving them around the chessboard a lot more frequently than maybe Ohio State has in the past. And we saw Larry Johnson and Matt Patricia doing that a year ago, and with a lot of great success. Is that going to be more extensive in 2026? I bet it is. And it's going to make it maybe more challenging for a dummy like me to put it in simple terms to talk about on the beat. But that's also going to make it a lot more complicated for teams in the Big Ten or for Arch Manning in September to figure out where the pressure is going to come from and what it's going to look like. And I think that's the exciting part of following this evolution, for the defense as a whole, but also for the defensive line specifically.
Yeah. I mean, we believe that Matt Patricia is returning to Ohio State and don't really have any reason to doubt that at this juncture. But I think part of the conversation for him and the return, and whatever ends up being the length of his new extension or whatever, is going to be based in a lot of ways on what he's allowed to do with the defense and what, how much freedom is he going to have, knowing that he's replacing 8 starters and 4 NFL, draft picks and all that stuff off last year's team. I would imagine that the ability to move guys around, to add players like Quaversaw, to use a guy like Allegro, to use a guy like Kari Wilder or Dre Quinn or anybody he wants is a big part of that conversation. And so that is part of the evolution, not just of the deployment of these players, but like Ohio State's overall and overarching philosophy down the road, because then you have to recruit to that. I wonder how close we are, and I'm gonna throw out a name here for the fan listeners, but I wonder how far away we are from a name like Robert Carpenter, for example, being like
the general
in as like an edge coach. I'm not sure if you know this, but Bobby Carpenter did play quite a few years in the NFL as an edge defensive end.
I did know that,
and he spent a lot of time at the Woody. And right
did he ever
now,
play for Matt Patricia?
I'm just saying that I heard that there might be it's something, one of those moves that makes sense, because we'll pivot this now for a moment to Larry Johnson's future and his career and where it's going. I don't know if 2026 is the final season for Larry Johnson. I wouldn't be surprised, as you said, if it is. I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't, based on the way that we've seen things go in the last, 12 years. But he is a guy who's not going to trust a lot of people. And if you want to have somebody come in and maybe work on a different skill set, a guy like Bobby Carpenter, who he knows and trusts, I think at least a little bit, is an interesting choice. Because I think about a player like Christian Allegro, for example, and I see a Bobby Carpenter type player there. So how do you get the most out of those guys? You give them the opportunity to do it, and you give them the path to the reward. And that's ultimately what Awaken 180 did for me.
Oh,
yeah. You like that?
How so?
Well, I mean, it taught me things. It taught me how to handle my business. It taught me how to handle the responsibilities that I had to myself and to my teammates, people like you, people like my wife, making sure I don't die by being unhealthy. For example,
I would prefer that you stay alive.
It's a little deep, but the reality is there's a lot of people taking shortcuts right now using like GLP-1s and that kind of stuff. And while I'm certainly not here to tell people how to live their lives, there is a healthier alternative to it, and a way to make sure that you're doing something and learning how to actually improve, not just how you look, but also how you live. And Awaken180weightloss.com certainly did that for me. I know it did it for you, and I think it'll do it for a lot of people if they just go to Awaken180weightloss.com and give it a shot.
Yeah, it does work. You'll be feeling great in no time heading into the start of spring football, which is now less than 3 weeks
spring
away.
Break. People could lose you can lose 25 pounds by spring break right now if you started today on Awaken 180.
There's absolutely no question about that.
When you look at defensive end, what is your biggest concern heading into this spring? Not the season, because we're going to see what happens, but heading into spring, what is the area that you think is the biggest concern?
I don't know that I have concerns about it. I said this to you the other day. I know you have mentioned that maybe if there was anything else Ohio State could have done in the transfer portal, one big name pass rushing pickup or one more, how much room do you really have for that? Both financially in terms of and scholarship numbers, especially if what you're talking about with, Quinn and Wilder, if those guys are able to play right away, which Ohio State is, paying, and with the expectation that they could do that, add in what you got in a Rousseau and the ability to move around Allegro, what you have in Zion Grady and Epi Satanale. I think that's a workable group for sure in terms of both different body types, different athleticism, stop the run, get off after the passer. I think they have everything they need. If we're going to put a fine point on what the concern would be, Kinyatta Jackson is the only one with snap in, snap out experience. Now that's slightly more than what they had a year ago, even with Kinyatta and Caden being in the system for as long as they were. We saw Zion Grady get out there in some high leverage situations. That's important for him to build on that this offseason. So it's a matter of experience, and that's been a recurring theme because Larry Johnson's been able to get old with the Rushman and see that process through. And then the depth has been something we've spent a lot of the offseason talking about. I think they have that. It's just not experience depth, which is more, difficult to obtain than anything else in the sport right now.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, ultimately, I've said before in our conversations over at Letterman Row, like I do wish that they could have found a way to bring in another guy. I think about a guy like Sahir West, the defensive end from James Madison, who they hosted for a visit, who ended up going out to UCLA to be with his former head coach, Bob Chesney. But even that, like I can understand the argument not to, because the reason you bring in a player like Sahir West at 6'4", 270 pounds, is because he played a lot of football last year as a freshman at James Madison. He's fundamentally no different than Epi Satanale as a prospect, but he has just played more football. So is the value for Ohio State still in developing its players, or is it in finding players who have got requisite experience elsewhere and you think can come in and help right away? What we find is that Ohio State truly believes that the players that spent the last year at Ohio State not playing are just as valuable and have as much upside as a player like Sahir West did, despite the fact that he was an all MEAC or whatever conference the James Madison is. So like, right. That's the argument that people have. Like, well, yeah, this guy played a lot of football. And then you're like, yes, he did, but he's a freshman and played at James Madison, who I know they made the playoff. But is he better as a prospect than Epi Satanale with a year in the system and understanding what it takes to win at Ohio State? I don't think so at the baseline. So like, it's easy to say, well, I wish they would have brought in one more, because sure, you wish they would have brought in Chaz Coleman or someone like that, but you also understand why they're not paying $2 million for a guy like Chaz Coleman at this point. So because if you want Zion Grady back and Epi Satanale back and Kinyatta Jackson back, well, then those are the concessions. So,
and I think they did.
I think they did, and they obviously got them all back. So the question is now, how do you make sure moving forward at defensive end, you win those battles on the recruiting trail the first time, right? And that's why the decision that Ohio State made to go all in with DJ Jacobs, the 5-star defensive end in the class of 2027, who's been committed since December, like you're talking about a Chase Young type player, right? And in the previous years, Ohio State was like, hey, fine, let him go. We'll get him on the flip side. But like players like that don't find the flip side very often. So now you have to make sure you win those fights. And I think Larry Johnson, if he was given the Adam King truth serum, you'd be like, man, I really wish we would have been doing this 5 years ago, because I would have had a lot more players and you guys wouldn't have all these questions about whether or not I could still recruit, because Larry Johnson still does a great job developing relationships. He still does a great job building trust in his room. His guys absolutely love him, but none of that stuff matters. His job is to get Ohio State to the 2-yard line, and then it's the NIL department's job to put the ball in the end zone, and they just haven't. So now it's up to Larry whether this is final year and we do a Larry farewell tour, a Larewell tour. A Larewell tour. Yeah, that works.
Better than where you're going there.
Yeah. Whoever is responsible for this position moving forward, like they are at least going to enter the next wave of recruiting. I think feeling confident that the Buckeyes understand now where the premium positions have to be addressed in high school recruiting, because that is where this defensive end position got really kind of wonky in the last few years, because it was after the Jack and JT 2021 recruiting class, and it just went down. Yeah. So now you got to fix it, and they seem to be doing it.
Yep. And Larry Johnson did an awesome job with that a year ago, and some of his best work has been done at defensive tackle, which we will move on to on the position review previews on Thursday on the beat, presented by the Waterworks. This, though, been about the edge, defensive ends, and the rushmen as we kick off the defensive side of the football. Can't wait. Spring ball is almost here, folks, and we will cover it every step of the way, as we always do on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV, and 10 TV Plus. Thanks again for joining us. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you tomorrow.